It started with something as simple as a parking space. On a quiet Sunday afternoon in a small Ohio town, 83-year-old Thomas Riley holed into the memorial parking lot like he did every year. He came to visit the wall, to stand before the names etched in stone, names of men he had once laughed with, fought beside, and mourned for. Thomas was a Vietnam veteran who had earned a Silver Star and 3 Purple Hearts, though he never liked to talk about them. He was not there for glory. He was there to remember. As he turned into a handicapped spot, one he had every legal right to use, he noticed 3 young men standing in the way. They were laughing, recording something on their phones. Thomas rolled down his window and asked them politely if they could step aside so he could park. What happened next would stun anyone with a conscience. One of the young men, a popular TikToker named Jake Walker, walked up to Thomas's window and without warning slapped him across the face. The blow knocked off his glasses and left a red mark on his cheek. His friends burst into laughter while their phones continued to record. "Mind your business, old man," Jake sneered. "This is going to blow up online." He was 23 years old, chasing views, likes, and sponsorships, using cruelty as a shortcut to fame. But Jake had no idea that just behind the glass of the diner facing the lot, more than 30 bikers from the Brotherhood Motorcycle Club were holding their monthly meeting. They saw everything, and they were about to remind Jake that there are still men in this world who stand up for those who can no longer stand alone.
Thomas Riley did not expect violence that day, but as his glasses hit the pavement and his hearing aid fell from his ear, he could feel the sting of the slap long after the sound had faded. The young man, Jake Walker, kept his phone pointed straight at him, grinning as he narrated the scene for his online followers. "Check this out," Jake said. "He probably just pretends to be a war hero for parking privileges." His 2 friends laughed and filmed from different angles, egging him on. When Thomas tried to step out of the car, Jake shoved the door closed with his foot. Then, for no reason other than mockery, he kicked the hearing aid across the lot. Thomas steadied himself, one hand on the door handle, the other trembling. His voice barely carried as he said, "Please, just let me park." Jake smirked. "What's wrong, Grandpa? Can't hear me now?" That was when the sound of chairs scraping against tile echoed from inside the diner. One by one, over 30 men stood up at once. They were not just anyone. They were members of the Brotherhood Motorcycle Club, a tight-knit group of veterans, firefighters, and blue-collar workers who had each other's backs no matter what. Their president, Frank Dawson, known to most as Tank, set his coffee cup down without a word. His voice, low and calm, carried like a thunderclap. "We have a situation outside," he said. No one asked questions. They just followed. They did not run. They walked, slow and steady, like a wave of leather and steel moving in rhythm. Their boots pounded the pavement like a warning bell. Heads turned in the parking lot as the group stepped into formation. Jake looked up, and for the first time that day, his smirk disappeared. "Yo, chill, man," he said, backing away. "It was just a prank." One of the bikers, a 6'5" man with arms the size of small logs, stopped in front of Jake. His name was Marcus, but everyone called him Hammer. He said nothing. He just stared. Tank stepped beside him. "You just assaulted a veteran in broad daylight," he said, "and filmed it for fun." Jake stammered. "It was content for social media. You guys do not understand how it works." Another biker, a lean man with a gray beard named Calvin, pulled out his phone. "Jake Walker, 3.3 million followers, known for controversial videos." He scrolled. "Pushed a homeless man into a fountain. Smashed a child's birthday cake. This is not your first time humiliating people." Jake took a step back. Okay, I will delete it." Tank shook his head. "Not just this one. All of them. Every single video where you use cruelty for laughs. Gone." Jake hesitated. "That is my career."
Hammer cracked his knuckles. "Then you better find a new one." Jake's hands trembled as he opened his app. One by one, the videos disappeared. What had started as a prank had now become a reckoning. He looked up at the circle of men around him and realized something terrifying. Not one of them had laid a hand on him, and yet he had never felt more overtowered. Because this was not about revenge, this was about respect, and Jake had crossed a line that he could never uncross. As Jake's hands trembled over his phone, deleting video after video, a quiet voice broke the tension. "That's enough," Thomas Riley said, steadying himself as he stepped forward. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of a man who had endured far more than humiliation in a parking lot. The bikers made way for him with silent respect. Thomas walked slowly, his back still aching from the fall, but his eyes were focused on Jake. "I don't want anyone hurt today," he said, glancing at Tank and the others. "This young man may have acted cruelly, but violence won't teach him what he truly needs to learn."
Jake looked confused. He was expecting fury, maybe revenge. But Thomas stood there with something else in his eyes. Not pity, not fear, but sorrow. "You know why I come here every year, son?" Thomas asked. Jake shook his head, lips pressed tight. Thomas nodded slowly and turned toward the memorial wall. "There's a name on that wall, Corporal David Miller. He was my closest friend during the war. We trained together, fought side by side. We joked about what we'd do when we made it home. But David never got that chance. He was 24 years old when he threw himself on a grenade to save the rest of us. I was standing next to him. He saved my life." The parking lot had fallen into a heavy silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Thomas continued, his voice firm but not raised. "David's last words to me were, 'Live a good life for both of us.' And I've tried. Every day for nearly 60 years, I've tried to live a life that honored the sacrifice he made. That's why I come here. Not for the medals, not for attention. I come to remember the man who gave everything." Jake looked down, unable to meet his eyes. Thomas stepped a little closer. "You share his age, but none of his courage. He gave his life for something greater than himself. You humiliated a stranger for something as empty as online views." Jake whispered, "I didn't know." Thomas nodded. "No, you didn't. But ignorance doesn't excuse cruelty." His voice softened, not from weakness, but from wisdom. "Son, I've been hit by trained soldiers who meant to kill me. Your slap? That didn't hurt. But what does hurt is realizing that men like David gave their lives for a future that now includes this kind of thoughtlessness. They fought against bullies, and today you became one."
Jake's eyes welled up, but he said nothing. He had nothing to say. Thomas reached into his pocket and picked up his cracked hearing aid from the ground. He looked at it for a moment, then handed it to one of the bikers standing nearby. "Can someone help me get this fixed later?" The biker nodded silently. Thomas turned back to Jake one last time. "It's not too late to grow into someone better," he said, "but that choice has to be yours. No one can force it on you, not even 30 angry bikers." Then he stepped back, leaving Jake to face not only the men around him, but the weight of what he had done. After Thomas stepped away, the weight of his words still lingered in the air like a slow-moving storm. Jake stood frozen, phone still in hand, eyes lowered. Around him, the members of the Iron Brotherhood did not move. They watched. They waited. And then Tank, the club president, stepped forward again. His voice was calm, but there was steel behind every word. "This is not over," he said. "You're going to keep deleting until there's nothing left that humiliates anyone." Jake looked up, voice cracking. "That's half my content." Tank didn't blink. "Then start over. or find a new line of work. Jake's hands shook as he scrolled through video after video. The prank on the fast food worker, the time he poured soda on a man sleeping on a bench, the birthday party he ruined for laughs. One by one they vanished, not just from his page, but from the internet. And with each swipe, his brand, his image, his so-called empire crumbled. But the bikers were not finished. Calvin, the gray-bearded writer who had first read Jake's profile, had been filming the incident for documentation. "You may want to call the police yourself," he said to Jake, "because if you don't, we will." Jake's face turned pale. "Why? I already said I was sorry." Tank crossed his arms. "You assaulted an elderly man, a decorated veteran, on camera. In the state of Ohio, that is a criminal offense. You don't get to walk away just because you apologized."
Jake pulled out his phone again, fumbling to dial. But Tank had already made the call. "Yes, Officer Monroe, this is Frank Dawson," he said calmly. "We have a young man here who attacked a senior citizen in front of multiple witnesses. Yes, there's video. No, he's not injured, but the victim is. Yes, we're at the memorial parking lot. We'll wait right here." He ended the call and turned back to Jake. "The police are on their way. Maybe next time you'll think before hitting someone who has already given more for this country than you ever will." Jake sat down on the curb, defeated. Thomas stepped toward him again. His face was soft but firm. "I forgive you," he said quietly. Jake looked stunned. "What?" Thomas nodded. "I've seen more violence than you can imagine. I've held dying friends in my arms. I've seen the worst of humanity. I'm not going to carry hate in my heart because of one slap, but forgiveness doesn't mean there are no consequences." Jake said nothing. A few minutes later, 2 police cruisers pulled into the lot. Officers stepped out and calmly took statements from everyone. Then they placed Jake under arrest for assault and elder abuse. As they read him his rights, Jake looked at Thomas, maybe hoping for rescue, maybe hoping this was just a nightmare. But Thomas only watched quietly, not with anger, but with solemn understanding. Jake was placed in handcuffs, his phone confiscated, and he was led to the squad car. His friends were nowhere to be found. They had disappeared long before the police arrived, leaving him alone to face the outcome of what was supposed to be just another prank. Before the door closed, Thomas stepped closer and said one last thing. "You wanted to go viral, didn't you?" Jake nodded slowly. "Well," Thomas said, "you just did, but not for the reasons you hoped."
Then the door shut, and the car drove away. Weeks passed after Jake Walker's arrest, but the internet never forgot. Video of him slapping Thomas Riley and the biker's quiet but powerful response spread like wildfire. Within 48 hours, Jake's sponsors dropped him. His TikTok account, with over 3 million followers, was permanently banned for violating platform policies. The damage didn't stop there. His car lease was canceled, his merchandise store shut down. For someone who had built a digital empire on shock value, it all vanished almost overnight. But while Jake's world collapsed, something else was quietly growing. The story of Thomas, the soft-spoken veteran who chose forgiveness without forgetting, began to touch hearts across the country. Thousands of people wrote messages of support. Veterans from every branch reached out. News outlets picked up the story, not for the scandal, but for the grace. Donations began to pour in, not to Thomas personally, but to a fund he had quickly redirected to the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans. In just 3 days, over $150,000 had been raised. When asked why he chose to donate all of it, Thomas simply said, Because there are others who need help more than I do. That's what David would have wanted. The Iron Brotherhood Motorcycle Club, moved by the overwhelming support, held a small ceremony at their next meeting. They presented Thomas with a custom leather vest, hand-stitched, bearing patches that read Vietnam Veteran and Protected by Brotherhood. For a man who had quietly carried the weight of war for decades, this simple gesture brought tears to his eyes. From that day on, Thomas no longer stood alone at the memorial wall. Every Veterans Day, every Memorial Day, every ordinary Tuesday he chose to visit, members of the Iron Brotherhood were there with him. Sometimes in full gear, sometimes just in jeans and boots, but always present, always watchful.
Then, 6 months later, on another quiet morning at the same memorial, a figure approached Thomas from behind. It was Jake. He looked different. No designer hoodie, no cameras, no entourage. Just a plain shirt, worn-out sneakers, and something unfamiliar in his expression. Humility. "Mr. Riley," Jake said softly, "I wanted to apologize again. Properly this time." Thomas turned, studying him for a moment. "Why now?" he asked. Jake reached into his jacket and pulled out a plain envelope. Inside was $4,000 in cash. "I've been working 3 jobs," Jake explained. "Restaurants, delivery, whatever I could find. I wanted to donate this. It's not much, but it's a start." Thomas held the envelope for a moment, then looked up. "Do you know why this matters more than the money?" Jake shook his head. "Because it shows growth," Thomas said. "Because you came here without a camera. Because you listened." They sat on a bench near the wall, and for the next 2 hours, Thomas told Jake everything about Corporal David Miller. He spoke of his courage, his laughter, the way he always volunteered for the dangerous assignments. He told Jake about the day David gave his life, about the guilt that followed, and about the promise to live a life worthy of that sacrifice. Jake listened silently, tears forming more than once. When Thomas finished, Jake took a deep breath. "I can't erase what I did, but I'll try to carry that name better." Thomas nodded. "That's all anyone can do." From that day forward, Jake became a regular volunteer for a new outreach program started by the Iron Brotherhood. They called it the Legacy Honor Project. The goal was simple: to teach young people about respect, sacrifice, and the real meaning of service. Jake never tried to become famous again. He did not need to. He had already learned the most important lesson of all: that honor is not something you chase for clicks. It is something you live, one day at a time.